We're speaking today a couple days after the Capitol riot that the mob stormed Congress, and you were there, and I wanted to hear what it was like in your own words. Could you tell me about your time in DC and walk me through what you experienced?
I arrived in DC the day before on January 5th, and I, wanted to get there early to get the environment to see what was happening. I knew that January 6th was the big protest day. I was unsure what was going to happen, but It was the big protest day. There was a few protests going on that night, so the tension was kind of rising, the energy was there. So the next morning, I went to the Trump rally, the big speech. I was there for a few hours.
Tell me a little bit, how many people were there? What was the mood at that rally? How close were you to the staging? Tell me about that.
It was mobbed. People were getting there, very early. It was very packed. There was very few masks being worn, which was a worry, of course, being in a packed crowd. So I stayed pretty far away. I was kind of on the outskirts for that initial rally. When Trump was speaking, at one point he said to walk over to the Capitol. And at the time that he gave that, I was already on my way towards the Capitol, and there was already a rush of people at the Capitol gates. So I arrived a little late to the scene in terms of the initial action at the Capitol.
That's interesting. Let me unpack that for a second. So what you're describing is the speech or the rally where President Trump is. He's saying, well, let's march to the Capitol. I think his words were, I'm going to march with you, but I don't think he did. So, let's march to the Capitol. So you make your way down to Congress, down to Capitol Hill. Walk me towards that moment. Tell me what that looked like.
There was already a decent crowd already at the Capitol. So I was walking ahead of most of them, but still in the pack of supporters. There was already more kind of gates than there normally would because they had a lot of barricades for inauguration coming up. Initially, the protesters are already kind of at the front steps of the Capitol, having a little bit of a police and protester standoff.
Did you have any interaction with supporters, with Trump supporters? Were they communicating with you, or did you communicate with them, as you were approaching Congress?
Yeah, personally, I did have interactions, but they were all fairly peaceful. I was wearing my press pass and, had my cameras, so I looked like press.
Right.
So they would come up to me, hey, who do you shoot for? Do you shoot for a right leaning, a left leaning? So they would ask me those kind of questions, and I would just, give them my answer. Independent journalist. I'm here to cover what's happening. This is a historic event. And from those interactions, I had pretty peaceful experiences. But with my fellow journalists there, some of them were heavily harassed.
So let's recap a little bit. You get to Congress and tell me a little bit of your experience there at Capitol Hill, and you're really capturing the moment. So walk me now through what you experienced with your lens. Tell me.
As soon as I got there, as soon as I reached the Capitol, like I said, there was already a protester police, kind of barricade front line. So I walked, right up to that. Where I was to the right, where it was a slightly bit more peaceful. To the left kind of the Capitol where I was standing, there was already flashbangs and mace being sprayed. So I walked up and tried to get, the best vantage point I could to get a better angle of what was happening behind that line. And a few of my pictures of the officers, being tear gassed and being sprayed came from that.
I think first and foremost, you have a photo of a policeman, clearly a policeman with his uniform and safety vest on the ground on his back, prone with a rioter on top of him. Can you tell me about that moment? Because you were clearly right in it. Tell me what happened.
At that moment, we can probably call them, domestic terrorists at this point. They made their main push and kind of broke through the police to kind of take over the full steps and the front plaza of the Capitol. What I witnessed was this man grabbed a police officer, wrestled with him, struggled with him, went directly for his face mask and respirator.
Now, speaking of equipment, you have another photo where there's a wheeled Trump sign that's up on, it's sort of horizontal, and they're using it against the police. What was happening there?
there was this massive, it was huge. I think it was like a 12-foot by like 12-foot steel structure that had a massive Trump 2020 banner, in the middle of it. And that banner was actually, I don't know where it came from, but I saw it probably 100 feet, 200 feet off in the crowd, being crowd surfed all the way to the front of the barricade.
It's just amazing. This sign is lifted up and crowd surfed from the back of the crowd and then lands up on police.
Yeah, absolutely. So on my Instagram, there's a little gallery of about 8 to 10 photos where you could see this massive sign be crowd surfed, come up to the police barrier, and then be thrown over. And it just kept moving, towards the Capitol. And then once it was there, it was like thrown over and then eventually pushed over the barricade into the back of the police line.
In the group of photos that you've shared with me and I've taken a look at, there's one that really stood out. A gentleman holding an axe handle. As a photojournalist, tell me about capturing that moment, because it's clearly a moment. It really tells a story in that instant. Tell me what that means to you.
Capturing those kind of raw emotion, split second moments is the reason why I do love, documenting and being a photojournalist. Is you do capture those moments, and those moments, can tell, even though it's a split second of the story, it can really almost tell the full story sometimes. The camera also helps because that is a very stressful, intense, dangerous situation.
Julian, thanks for talking to me today. You'll be covering other events in the future, and it's important, please, that you stay safe. Julian Leshay, independent photojournalist, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me on.